Hey guys, it's Istebrak. I wanted to do a quick reveal video for my latest brush set, which is the blending set. It's something that I designed and put together for a while now. Probably since January I've been compiling all the major brushes that I use for Smudge tool. And I really wanted to do a dedicated video on how to use these brushes, not just reveal them and then give them to you guys, but talk about how to smudge and why smudging is the superior form of blending over using the eyedropper tool. So as you know, a lot of you already use, like, you lay down one bulk of color and another bulk of color beside each other, and you use the eyedropper tool to capture the value in between and then blend. The issue with that is it's a great technique. It is very digitally dependent, but it doesn't transfer over into traditional. And for me, traditional is like the canon. Whatever can transfer over into traditional is optimal. Whatever technique you have that you have a way to translate it into traditional and apply it to a painting using pencil or paint or something like that is the best way. The reason why is because that usually promises efficiency and all-around technique that is clean, that is straightforward, that works in layers. And smudging is that thing that we have traditionally that I missed a lot when I moved into digital, and it's been a massive movement since I haven't gone back to traditional as heavy as I work with digital. So smudging is the best thing right now that'll help bridge that gap in technique. What I usually do is when I'm blocking in the early stages, and I've talked a lot about what blocking in means, using a hard edge brush to block in major shades, major geometric anatomy signatures along the face, capturing the form and the edge work and the characteristics of the light, the direction of the cast shadows, all that basic light environment stuff, capturing large bodies of muscles and anatomy, all that is good. What I do use when I'm working early on in the painting and the molar brush strokes, those early stages, I do sometimes use the eyedropper tool to capture general shades that I want to explore. Usually I'm blocking in a lot, so I'm not even blending that early. But later on, it's really about that polish later on, when you want to get that kind of bloom and softness that skin has. It's very difficult to accomplish when you're working with such a kind of like a sterile almost feeling, a very stiff brush that can lead you to having a more artificial look to the skin, or a kind of like a porcelain look to the skin, especially if you're using soft brush. Smudge tool brings in, as you paint, you smudge this layer and that layer, you smudge this set of values and that, and eventually out of smudging on and off and recapturing your edges and smudging areas that need real blending or gradation. In doing that, you're slowly, layer by layer, building this haze. That haze is what I missed as well when I moved into digital. I didn't get that haze anymore, and I thought for a long while that I could pull it off with soft brush and I could teach with soft brush, and soft brush is really great for covering a great amount of space and not bringing in harsh edges where I don't need them. But at the same time, I think it's bad for your technique. Soft brush does not transfer over into digital, which is why I became so against using that for the entire duration of the painting. I use it a lot for paint overs, only because I don't want to ruin the painting I'm working on and paint over the details the student has worked on. But for me, for starting from scratch, I try to stay away from the soft brush and replace it by using the smudge tool. Now this specific brush set, I'll show you how to use it in a second, but this brush set, these smudge brushes that you combine with the smudge tool, come with a texture, so they're never going to give you that high polish, airbrush look that soft brush gives you, which again recreates that sterile, textureless, polished, artificial looking blending of colors. Nothing really blends like that. It's too glowy, it's too hazy, everything feels like it's got subsurface scattering underneath it. So they have this texture, this real texture underneath them. When they blend a little messily, which is exactly how I like to blend traditional. If I'm using charcoal or pencil, I'm always blending. Every brush stroke that I lay down, it doesn't stay as a raw brush stroke, it gets filtered through the blend and smudged out, so that it doesn't leave this really ugly trail of raw brush stroke behind it. Those trails are good for the early stages, again, to capture major differences in surface areas and plateaus, what's looking at the light, what's looking away. But later on in the game, later on in the painting, you're not supposed to leave behind tails of brushes. You're supposed to be pretty much seaming everything together after that. So that's really what this brush set is about. What these brushes are about is in teaching the student to and getting them used to introducing smudging as part of their technique. If smudging is not part of your technique, again, I'll cover how to do it really in the big technique behind it in a second, but if it's not part of your process, really start making it a part of your process. Get into it. Get into somehow incorporating it into the way you combine two shades if need be, the way you paint lips, the way you paint eyes, areas of the face that without smudging they would really feel very, very fake and not real, sticker-like. Like for instance, the eyebrows. I smudge so much around the eyebrows because there is always a haze and a halo, a small brush of small hairs all around the eyebrows. And I just can't seem to pull that off. If I use soft brush, it's too soft. If I use a blocking brush, it's too harsh and it's introducing detail that I don't want to contest with the eyes. So smudge tool is just the next best thing to use, the next best thing to do to pull off that believable glow of hair, that believable outline of hair all around the eyebrows, and to seam it into the skin seamlessly under all of that oil. Another thing that smudging is really optimal for is the feeling that, everything is sitting underneath a layer of oil in the skin, and skin isn't just this perfect one solid surface. It's porous, it's spongy, it's oily in areas, it's wet in areas, it's reflective in areas, it's matte in areas. You can pull off this exact feeling as you see it in your reference with the smudging, with the smudge tool. So that's what I really like to promote, stuff and techniques and ideas that source from our limitations in traditional. We transfer those limitations and the way we've adapted to those traditional techniques on digital. So that's really what it's all about, just the adaptation, the fact that we are working outside of digital at this time and digital dependency. And because we've worked outside of digital, we've developed these techniques that look so great, like dry brush. The brushes that I made, the previous brushes that I've released, are all dry brush. They're all like these really hard, gritty brushes, which comes out of my love for dry brush and dry oil technique, basically not putting a lot of water in the paint or diluting the paint, just bringing in a really, really dry brush and some paint on it and running it over a paper, and you get this wonderful texture, and as well as a lot of feed and a lot of paint. That's one thing that inspired my previous brushes. The brushes from before can be combined, the skin polish, the master set, can be combined with smudge tool as well to give you that softer smudge at the top. It isn't a scatter, but it does work to trail off some areas the way I would smudge it with my fingertips. But this specific brush set they all have scatter turned on. And scatter, if you use Photoshop, you're familiar with the settings. Scatter gives you that really randomized pen pressure and randomized feed in the color. These brushes, you can use them with paint, with the paintbrush, but they are designed to be used with with the smudge tool. And the pen pressure, the opacity, the spacing, they're all designed to be really optimal when you're working with smudge tool. One big issue is computer performance. If your computers can't handle the spacing that I have on them, you most likely should increase the spacing. The spacing is just going into settings and going into your brush presets and just making sure that you have spacing increase, so you have more spaces in between each brush that's applied. If it is very low, your computer is going to lag out and you won't be able to use smudge tool. All of these brushes, if used too large, will make even the best computer. I have 30 gigabytes of RAM almost, and it makes my computer lag, and if I use them really large. So remember, the smudge tool is supposed to be used as a small size. They are given pretty large, but just everyone's canvas size is different, everyone's subject is different, so it's best to just decrease the brush and test out a little bit how it's performing with your computer, adjust them thereafter, and then save the setting. But that's it really. That's all I wanted to cover for this painting specifically. I really didn't like that sterile look in the beginning where it was just so shiny. It was just so shiny looking. And I usually never do this. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but my latest paintings have been pretty mattified. I don't like depending on the highlight because it invites my dependency on contrast. And I don't like depending on contrast. So I turned the contrast all the way down. I wasn't really finished painting this. I had a busy week, so I stopped painting it and didn't finish. But I completed it just now, and I used the exact brush that I've released And I just started smudging away at things that I didn't want to take attention away from the nostril, the eye, and that whole crosshair of focus. So I started with the lips. I started smudging away. I also smudged away at any edges of the face so that I don't have a complete outline. I really like smudging around the eyes. I like smudging one eye over another eye. I like smudging one nostril over another. I like smudging the entire body of the lips. This angle was pretty difficult for me as well, especially with the reference. It was very difficult to transfer it over and work with it. But I think I pulled off the perspective, but it still came off as some sort of like a porcelain, plastic looking girl. And I didn't really like that. I wanted that mattified, very limited, low contrast, traditional feel, that painterly feel. So smudging is one big part of pulling off a painterly painting. You don't just mess around with your brushes and not blend them to get painterly. Painterly is anything that mimics the limitations we had when we painted traditionally. That's typically what it means. Write that back to me. I'm joking. So what that means is, okay, let's lay down two dry brush strokes beside each other. What I would do is get an empty brush, a brush without any paint, probably a fan brush, and blend those two together by smudging. So again, people say that using the mixer brush or using the eyedropper tool are crutches. Are good, and that you should use the smudge tool, but really I see them as crutches. The mixer tool especially. The mixer brush, never use that. It brings in new paint, whereas smudging just rearranges the paint you've already applied. You've applied that paint with a purpose. You blocked in early on, and you designed and you chose those values to match a light environment. Why bring in a brush that's bringing in more paint? If I laid down those two lines of color on my canvas traditionally, I'm not going to bring in a brush full of color and start mixing. I'm just introducing new color and ruining the choices that I made. I'm bringing in an empty brush, a brush without any paint on it, a fan brush, something dry without any water on it either, and I'm just blending those two values together. So right around, just around the eyes, I started blending some of that, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm eliminating edge work where I don't want it, and bringing the focus back towards the eye and its gaze downward. And that's what smudging gives you. That smudging gives you that same technique, that same feeling, that same grit, that same roughness that you get with traditional. This beautiful, lively, alive texture that feels active, that feels that it's not so static and sterile as when you're painting and it's just blending constantly and with constant dependency on your eyedropper and going back and forth and creating edges between everything instead of blending where you really need to and edge work where you really need to. It is guided by a skill, and it is guided by knowledge. If you're not well into your skill level, it's best to not worry too much about painting painterly. Smudge tool is recommended to all skill levels. Smudge tool is an excellent way to explore your ability to rearrange paint. Rearranging paint is what painting is. It's an excellent technique to explore and introduce into your toolkit. But just remember that painting painterly isn't the goal of Smudge tool. It's not just about painting painterly. This is a painterly painting, but before I started smudging it out, this painting was fully polished, and I had used Smudge tool on it. You can use Smudge tool to fully polish a painting. It's not necessary that it's only for painterly stuff or stuff that you want to mimic as traditional. So these are some of my thoughts. I'm going to show you in a quick second how to smudge with them, how to use them, what they're all about. But yeah, I hope these brushes help you guys. I didn't want to release these brushes without giving you a quick tutorial on how to use them. I am going to be covering how to use them in the weekly meets on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I did want to make a dedicated little segment of time to explore how to use them, what to think about, when to use them, and how not to overblend, and how to blend around edges, and how to blend around or smudge around edges and smudge around large gradients and fatty pockets. So what I wanted to show you real quick on this painting of mine here is just how to use every one of these brushes and how to smudge exactly. So you know the purpose of smudging is to unify two shades together with a more natural rearrangement of the values instead of depending on bringing in a new color using eyedropper. So the first one, which is a very, very strong blending brush, it's a little bit more textured than the rest, and it's very fuzzy and hazy. And one thing I really wanted to smudge in this painting is, let me double duplicate the layer first so I can show you the before and after. I wanted to blend away at the eyelids. For some reason, it just kept bothering me that I had too much outline on the lower eyelid, and I really didn't want that. Again, I didn't want to look like, I didn't want to make any beginner mistakes. I didn't want to outline. I didn't want to feed my desire to outline stuff. And around the eyes, I'm almost always invited to bring in a dark lash line or something like that. So what I'm doing is I'm blending really quick using this textured brush. As you can see, let me use it on paintbrush. It's got a very, very strong texture to it, and it's very scattered, which I like when you're combining two values that are very similar to each other. So this one is good for combining two values that are similar to each other, light gray and dark gray, but it's not good for combining like values that are very different, because then you get a really defined texture. If you want that, of course, that's great, but just remember that smudging and which brush you use depends on what you're smudging exactly. Are you smudging a dark and a light? Are you smudging two values that are very close to each other? Are you smudging high contrast? Or are you using it to paint in something? Then you're going to be getting that texture out of it, the silhouette of that texture. So I did look into, when I was putting these together and polishing them and finalizing them for release, I did think about the silhouette of their texture and what they were bringing in texture-wise. Again, it's always great to have texture when you go to filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. All of that beautiful texture comes out that you lost and all that softness and pen pressure. But it is like a tug of war. It's a back and forth when it comes to how much you're blending and how much texture you're preserving. And when a smudge tool comes in that has that nice amount of texture in it, you don't have to sacrifice either or anymore. You can still blend and still maintain texture. So that's one way to blend, and that's something I really wanted to do, just blend these areas together. I could have tried to do this with a soft brush on my brush, and I could have done this and pulled it off on soft brush, but not without getting on darken mode and getting the soft brush and fixing its opacity and shrinking its size, and just extensively going in and bringing in new information. Instead, I like the information already there. I like the values I already chose. I just wanted to soften that edge a little bit, and that's what smudging is all about. This specific piece I smudged a lot, and this exact brush is what I used to smudge around the lips. It's what I use to smudge around the nose and what I use to smudge around the eyebrows. Like I said, the eyebrows are one of the most important areas to smudge. It'll really feel like messy hair. If you don't do that, it'll feel like every single hair was plugged into the follicle, and it'll feel like an android or some sort of uncanny texture. And hairlines, hair, I'm always smudging lash lines. Anywhere where there's lots of water or oil welling up around the eye, I smudge. These are all great places to keep very soft and very seamless. The next brush that I smudge with, also actually I did use this one as well around the lips. Looks a little bit like that. Very, very messy, but not so, like it's very bold, but not so scattered silhouette-wise. So it doesn't have those little wispy bits at the edges, which is nice for me because I like to hide some of the areas that I'm smudging. I don't want it to be an outright texture. So I basically use this brush just around anywhere where there is a fatty pocket or something like that. Usually I don't like any wispy bits or excessive texture around something that's supposed to be soft, like a soft cheek or a forehead or a chin or a lip even. I like to just be really, really soft around these areas, just around here. Let's say we had this block right here, so we usually have these areas just like that when we're blocking in the early stages. This brush right here is really great for smudging away at these geometric edges. Again, please remember that when we're blocking in, we're blocking in for a reason. We're not blocking in so that we can just start blending away this massive, like with this massive brush, blending away at that edge we worked so hard on to preserve. What we do, anytime you go anywhere near a geometric edge or a signature of a geometry or an anatomical geometry or anything, we're shrinking our brush when we're smudging. So shrink that brush around, and this is the brush that I used pretty much to smudge this area and get this exact effect around the nose. It's exactly the same as when as before we blocked it in. This next one is also really, really strong. It's a little bit of both. It's got a great silhouette to it. It's got a great little silhouette just like that. It's got wispy bits and it's got a strong, bold shape, but it has a lot of gray area, which means it's not going to smudge as much. So let's give it a quick test around the eyebrows. It's not going to smudge as much as the other one. The one that's coming up is actually really bold. It's one of my favorite ones. Again, I'm just smudging around the eyebrow. I did unsharp mask this just a little bit so we can have a starting point for what we're smudging. But it's got that little bit of texture if you can catch it, if you can see it. And again, I really like that when I unsharp mask again or use the sharpen tool. I do use the sharpen tool over some of these if I want to capture a texture. As hard as we can try, we're not going to pull off the same kind of dry brush technique as we do in traditional. And sharpening the texture is one way to bring out the texture and pull off that painterly feeling. This one is very strong. This is a very strong brush. Its silhouette is it's unbelievable. It's kind of like a little rogue brush like that, and I worked really hard on capturing the right shape, but it was because it was just a circular shape with little wisps on the edges. It was really difficult for me to figure out how much scatter I wanted, so I had to make sure I had it on the right degree and the right tilt for it to behave as a bold piece without me leaving behind circles everywhere. So this is what it does. Let me show you. Let me just smudge an entire eye area out, which is something I really like to do. Look at that power. It's really a really strong brush, but I love how it feels. It's so great for building like a plane for where we're going to place the eye. I love this. I love blending away anatomy and having just a little bit of anatomy peek through. I really love doing this. Sometimes I blend away and erase away at the top layer and get some of the lower layer back. But I still have that smudged look. And again, this was not pulled off by soft brush. I'm not going to put soft brush on scatter because it's way too much power. That's like wildfire. This specific brush is like soft brush on scatter, but way more controlled. But yeah, this is a really, really strong blending brush. This one is probably one of my favorites, and I've just been using it in all the preliminary stages of the painting. I've just been using this one. Let me show you again how strong that is. Oops. It's just so bold, but it's also got this pen pressure to it that it stops right where you need it to. Just beautifully blending in this area. Really one of my favorite brushes. And then this one, which is a speckle brush, a speckle scatter. So it's basically a speckle brush that has this beautiful pen pressure to it and transfer, but it's not like the other one. It's not a full coverage. It's more like a speckly little blending. And you have some of these really, really defined textured areas right here. Oops. And if you just zoom in, you can see the trace and the leftovers of that speckle, which is something I really liked. I didn't like how in blending I lose all this texture. And this is the equivalent of having a canvas texture laid over your painting. Traditional, again, the canvas texture doesn't just get smudged away. It peeks through all the conte and all the charcoal and all the paint. It comes through. Whereas digital, we have to get an overlay texture and lay it over the canvas for us to get that canvas feeling. But this smudge tool, I made it speckle so that it has that canvas texture just pull off. I don't like how sometimes when I'm smudging, especially in all the other brushes that we saw, they tend to erase the texture underneath them, leaving behind a soft brush look. And I know I talk a lot of shit about soft brush, but I use it a lot. And soft brush doesn't mean it's a bad tool. It's just sometimes we use it in the wrong ways. And I've seen countless students in 14-day challenges and otherwise use the soft brush in the wrong way. Just remember that if you are using a soft brush, you're painting away the texture. The texture is really important. We can't forget. It's not just about blending colors and having the right values. It's having the right texture, that right grit and micro texture that's sitting in between every layer, that's revealed in the perfect grays and sometimes in the silhouettes of the high contrast areas like blacks and lash lines. We don't want to lose texture. So all these brushes have a texture to them. This powerful texture. The silhouettes have a massive reach, an open variety in bulk and looseness and delicacy. And that's pretty much all that, all of these have an A+ in my mark and very ready for smudging. Just remember that spacing might be an issue with your computer. If you have lower end computers, if you have a computer that's a little old, if your graphics card isn't ready for this kind of bulk, then make sure you're decreasing the spacing. Just go into your brush settings and go here and just increase the spacing. You won't get the same effect, but unfortunately you have to work within your limitations with your computer. You can also dedicate RAM through your Photoshop to have your Photoshop use a little bit more RAM than it's allowed right now, and this means that you might have to close Chrome and might have to listen to your music through Windows Media Player or whatever you use. But I think it's worth it. I think I would close Chrome. I'd close everything if my computer couldn't handle running all of that and a smudge tool. But yeah, all these brushes, please remember they're supposed to be used with Smudge Tool. Start using Smudge Tool. Smudge Tool is amazing. Again, I don't know who's out there telling everyone don't use Smudge, but please just don't listen to them. Smudge is an amazing way to rearrange paint. It's an amazing way to manipulate paint. It transfers over your skills into traditional, and it doesn't leave you digitally dependent. Thank you everyone for watching. I'll catch you guys on Critique Hour. Bye.